Okay, this is the Random Walker CodeAlong. This is the first, hopefully, in a series. And let me get this draw loop out of the way. Always remember to rename your projects. This is the Random Walker. In the process of this, I'm going to show you how to randomize colors with the RGB function, and also how to randomize motion and introduce the draw loop and a bunch of other things. So here we go. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add 3 variables. So I'm going to go to the variables toolbox and drag over 3 of the very top block, var x equals. And the first variable is going to be red. And remember that you can hit tab to rapidly move through these blocks and parameters and such. The next one's going to be green. Next one's blue. And then I am going to go to the math drawer and scroll down here to random number, and I'm going to pull in a random number block on the right side of the equal sign for each of those. And I'm going to change these parameters so they go not from 1 to 10, but from 0 to 255. Next thing is, let's just look at how randomizing colors works. We're going to go to the drawing tab, drawer. I think that code.org calls these drawers in the toolbox. And pull over a background block, that's the top one, hit the drop down next to white and scroll down to RGB, and then click on the white space and that'll put the block in. Instead of these 3 arguments, 25500, we're going to put in our variables, red, green, blue. And what that does is, when a computer executes these 3 lines of code, it's going to take a random number between 0 and 255 and put it in the red box. It's going to assign that to the red variable and then assign a different number to the green variable and another different random number to the blue. And then we use those numbers down here by putting the variable label in. And so that will randomize the color of the background every time we run the program. Kind of nice. And we get a huge variety of colors, like some 16 million plus colors this way. So that's an easy way to randomize. To get a random color, use the RGB. You can use that in fill, like if we pull in a fill block, hit the drop down, select RGB, just in the same way as we did before. But if I put red, green, blue here, we're not going to see anything. Whoops, I got to put like an ellipse in. And I'm going to make this a little smaller. Let's make it a 50 by 50. We're not going to see, we see the stroke around it. There's a line around it, but it's the same color as the background. And if we took that stroke off with no stroke, we would see nothing because it blends into the background, right? So it'd be nice to make that a different random color, and we can do that. We don't have to put the red variable in for the red parameter, or the green for the green, or the blue for the blue parameter. We can mix those up, which scrambles the numbers up and gives a different color. So I could go for the fill of the ellipse, green, blue, red, and that's going to give me a different random color each time. Nice. Okay. So I'm going to show you how to animate this circle and make it move. But first, in order to do that, we need to learn how to count with the machine. So we're going to create another variable. So I'm going to pull in another var x equals block. And this one I'm going to call counter and set it equal to 0 for starters. Then we're going to go to world and pull in a function draw block right at the bottom. And this is a special block. It's because it's called a loop. And that means that it will execute all of the commands that we put inside of it. And when it gets to the last line, it will go back up to the first line and do it all over again. And it will continue to loop like that forever. So we're going to need that to count. We're going to count upwards with our counter variable. And I'm going to go back to variables here, and I'm going to go to the third block, x equals, and pull that into the draw loop. And I'm going to change this so it says counter equals counter plus 1. Counter equals counter plus 1. What this does, this is how we count. When we enter the draw loop and we execute this line of code, the computer will evaluate what's on the right side of the equal sign first. So when it sees this variable counter here, it will put in the current value of counter, which is currently 0 because we initialized it to 0 on line 4. Then it will add 1 to it, so it becomes 1. And then it will store the result back into the counter variable here, so counter now becomes 1. Then we're at the end of the loop because there's only one command, so we go back to the top of the loop, and then it does that command again. So it goes in and puts the current value of counter in here, which is now 1, adds 1 to it, so it becomes 2. Then it stores it back into counter, so counter now is 2. And each time through the draw loop, it then increments counter by 1 this way. So this is how we count upward. Now, it would be nice to be able to see that happen. And we can do that by pulling in one of these console.log message blocks. So we're going to pull that in, and we're going to delete message, and we're also going to delete the quotes here. And in place of that, we're going to put our counter variable, counter. So what this will do is when the computer gets to line 11, it's going to report the value that's stored in the counter variable to the debug console down here at the bottom. The computer cycles through the draw loop 30 times a second by default. So it's going to count upward really fast when we reset and run this. You can see my debug console popped up. And here the numbers are rapidly rising upward. So we've been 200, 300 times through the draw loop, 400 times through the draw loop, 500 times, and it will just keep going forever. Nice. So we know how to count up now, and I want to do something with that. I want to actually use that counter variable in my fill function here instead of the green, blue, red. So instead of getting a different random color every time with that ellipse, what I'd like to do is I would like to start the ellipse at one color and then gradually change the color in a cycle. Cycle through red. So I'm going to reset this. So if I go to line 7, and instead of green, I'm going to put in my counter variable. Blue, I'm going to start at 0. Red, I'm going to start at 0. Now, there's one other thing we have to do here, because the RGB function, the parameters, takes a number between 0 and 255. That's why we randomized it from 0 to 255 up above. When we have counter in here, it's putting the number in, right? And it's counting upward, but it'll count up forever. We want it to start back at 0 when it gets to 255. So I'm going to go to the control drawer, and I'm going to pull in the third block down, if. And I'm going to put that at the bottom of the draw loop. It's got to be inside the draw loop, but it's underneath the console.log counter command. We're going to give this a condition and say, if the counter variable becomes larger than 255, counter greater than 255, then it's going to do whatever in that if, and we're going to go to variables drawer and pull in that third block again, inside the if this time. We're going to say set counter back to 0. Counter equals 0. So this should cycle through, it should count up to 255 and then go back to 0 and then count up to 255 and then go back to 0 over and over again. Let's try it. Run. Now watch the debug console. We're at 100, 30, 40, 50, 60, 170, 180, 190, 255, and it goes back to 0, and now we're counting back up. And take a look at what happens to the ellipse. It starts at 0, 0, 0, right? Because the counter starts at 0. And it gradually is not, is it doing it? It's not doing it. What mistake did we make? I think the mistake that we made is we didn't put the ellipse and the fill and no stroke into the draw loop. So we have to put those in there to animate them. So I'm going to click and drag over those. And I'm going to drag those into, let's put them at the bottom of the draw loop. Now, if we watch the ellipse, you can see that it's gradually becoming red. And then when it gets to 255, it goes back to black. So it's cycling through 0, counting up to 255 and changing the color as it goes. Nice. Okay. So the last thing I want to do here is make the ellipse or the circle move, because that was the whole idea, is to make this as if it's walking around, like it's going for a walk, but each step it goes in a random direction. Like imagine flipping a coin before you take a step, and if it's heads you go left, and if it's tails you go right. It's sort of like that, but we might go forward, we might go left, we might go right, we might go backwards each step that we take. So how do we do that? Well, as you may have guessed, we have to change the X and the Y position of the ellipse. So remember, that's down here. It's set to 200, 200 right now. X is 200, Y is 200, and that's right in the middle of the screen. We could create a couple more variables, a variable for X position and a variable for Y position. So let's do that. I'm going to go to the variables drawer. I'm going to pull over the top block again, var X equals. I'm going to put it up here under counter, and then another one. And the first one is going to represent X position. So I'm going to do X POS. And I'm going to set it equal to, it's going to start at 200. And then Y POS, and that's also going to start at 200. Okay, so we've initialized these variables. Now we need a command that adds to that current value of the variable some random number. Okay, so I'm going to pull over the third block, X equals something. Let's put that down here at the bottom. Let's put it under the if statement. It doesn't really matter. But we'll put it right there. Not in the if, below the if. X position is equal to X position plus a random number between, let's say, -5 and 5. And then we need another block exactly like this, except for Y position. Actually, I'm going to pull this one out, and I'm just going to highlight this one and do Command C and then Command V to copy it. And then I'm going to change the X here and here to a Y. What does this do? It takes the current value of the X position and adds to it a random number from -5 to 5 inclusive. And it does the same thing with the Y. It takes the current value of Y, like 200, and it adds to it a number from -5 to 5. And that becomes the new Y position. It does that every time, 30 times a second it does that through the draw loop. So we're constantly adding a positive or a negative number to it, to its position, its X and Y positions, and we should see it move around now. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put X position and Y position in here on line 18, X, because we have to use those variables when we draw the ellipse. So let's try that. And sure enough, we now have our ellipse randomly walking around the screen and changing color as it goes. Nice. No, I think the only other thing I did during this segment was I actually made the ellipse smaller. I did a 10 by 10 pixel circle. I like that. It's a finer resolution, and it'll create these blobs that kind of slowly change value from completely black up to bright red. And you can use whatever color you want. Maybe you're not in a red mood, maybe you're in a blue mood. To change that, we would go up to our fill, or down, I guess, to our fill, line 17. And instead of putting counter in for the red parameter, we could put it in for the blue parameter. And make red 0. And then it would cycle through the sort of the blue spectrum. And it would become bright blue before, or sort of like a royal blue before it goes black. I like that. How about green? Let's try green. It's fun to play around with this once you get it going. Whoa, green on pink. That's wow, that's a vibrant green color. I like that. Not against the pink, but it's almost like a yellowish green. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff with this. We could go, I mean, what happens if we put counter in for red and blue? I mean, will that give us some spectrum of purples? I don't know. It's like a dirty green background. Yeah, it does. Look at that. Like magenta and like hot pink. I don't know. I'm colorblind, so... But that's fun. Or what about, I don't know, what if we... What happens with the green and blue? This gives us more of a subdued green, it looks like. More of like an aqua sort of, or it looks to me more like cyan almost. I like those colors too. What if we do them all? I mean, that would go from black to white, no? This is going to be grayscale. Grayscale from black to white? Interesting. And what about red-green? Red and green gets to the oranges. Orange and yellow. Okay. Wonderful. All right. Well, that was fun. Hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.